Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Maryland Apex Accelerator webinar. Glad you could join us today. I'm your host, Yasmin Razak, and I'm the Marketing and Training Coordinator here. Today's topic is, are you ready for a GSA schedule? And it is led by Greg Ayres of Ayres Consulting. We'll get started very shortly, and there will be opportunities for you to ask Greg your questions by typing them in the chat box on your screen. We'll try to get through as many of those questions at the end of the session. So please do stay tuned in. This is a 2-hour presentation. We will give a 5-minute break at the top of the hour, but we will definitely try to answer all your questions. As always, this session's been recorded, and a copy of the recording and the slides will be shared with you after the presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with the Maryland Apex Accelerator, it's our mission to help Maryland businesses to fully compete in federal, state, and local government procurement processes. Our services are no cost to you. So if you need assistance, please complete our application form on our website, marylandapex.org. Okay, enough from me. Over to you, Greg.
I appreciate everyone joining us this morning. I don't know how many people are familiar with Jim Cramer and Mad Money, but he has a saying that I'm just going to plagiarize. My role here today is to teach and educate you and hopefully help you make some money. So that's what the GSA schedule is all about. It's getting you a contract with the government that certainly can be used with state and local governments as well as the federal government. I also want to offer you an opportunity, and the opportunity is very simple. I will work with you if you're interested in getting the schedule, and do this through a situation where I will basically meet with you and assess what you want to do and how you want to do it and if you're eligible to do that. But to establish those meetings, what I need you to do is to send me an email. So if you're interested, as you can see, my email address is there as airsconsultant1@earthlink.net. If you are interested in getting a schedule, I will give you all the particulars and walk through the process with you and make sure that you understand and you are in fact eligible for a schedule. And so all I'd ask you to do is to send me an email and basically tell me you'd like to meet, and then I'll try and find a time on my schedule to make that conveniently supportive for everyone. So without further ado, let me start going through these slides and see what we've got. Now, as you know, there's some frequently asked questions, and the first question is how hard is it to get a schedule? It's really not very difficult to get a schedule, but you have to meet certain prerequisites. First of all, you need to be in business for at least 2 years. And why do you need that? Because you have to provide profit and loss sheets and balance sheets to GSA. And so the process is to do those, you have to be able to do that. And a lot of people, a lot of small businesses don't establish their profit and loss and balance sheets because there may be 2 or 3 people working in it, and they say we can adjust for that. But for GSA, you have to have those profit and loss and balance sheets. And probably the easiest way is to have some sort of accounting system, and that accounting system can be as simple as Quicken, or it can be as complex as some of the other accounting systems. But you need to have some way to generate those reports. And so it's important to, if you're not doing that currently, to establish that and make that happen so that you can have those 2 years of balance sheets and profit and loss sheets. And those profit and loss sheets have to be in accrual, not cash. A lot of people say, well, I'll do the cash methodology. No, that won't work for GSA. You need to have that in accrual. You also need to have generated at least 50,000 in revenue in the last 2 years. So if you're a small business and you're trying to get going and get started, 50,000 can be a significant hurdle. But that's their marker to measure if in fact you're ready, if you have the capability to do that. The next issue is one that a lot of people sort of get tripped over. And that's very simple. You need to have two different contracts. And the two different contracts, you need to use the same labor category. Now, those contracts can be commercial contracts, they can be, uh, whatever they might be. They can be state contracts, local contracts, but they need to use the same labor category, especially if you're doing IT, because IT requires that you have that matching situation where if you're listing a program manager, you have to be able to show the rates for that program manager and write up, in fact, two separate past performance descriptions, and we'll go through what those are in a bit. But you have to be able to do that for IT. If you're not doing IT, you can get away with one, but you have to be able to say these are the labor categories. Well, you also might say, well, I just want to sell products. Well, the same thing is true for products. If they're IT products, again, you have to have two. But if in fact they're normal products, you have just to have one. So the next question is, does my company have to be a prime contractor to get a schedule? And the answer is, of course, no. Subcontracting is fine. Though we recognize that going through a prime contractor to get a contract, they're going to discount your rates. They're going to probably take 10% off the top. But the real issue is this is a getting in process, and you can adjust those over time, those rates over time. But the real issue is you don't have to be a prime contractor, doesn't have to be federal contracts, and state and local contracts will work. And just a little expounding on the local contract, the local contract can be with your local county or city. Or even another business. It doesn't have to be a big federal contract, but you want to be able to say, this is what we've done, this is how we've done it, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. And the other thing is, GSA actually prefers commercial contracts over government contracts. And why is that? Well, GSA looks at it as a government contract's already been discounted. So if you're fortunate enough to have a GWAC, like an 8A stars contract, because you're an 8A company, that's fine. But and those rates have already been discounted, so they'll just go ahead and use those rates. But in fact, the commercial contracts are usually fully burdened, undiscounted rates, and so again, GSA believes they can get discounts from you by using those commercial contracts, and that's why they prefer those types of situations. And the other thing is it hard to write a GSA proposal, a mask proposal? And the answer is no. There are about 34 items that have to be included, and most of these items have to confirm to the GSA standard. And I shouldn't say most; they have to confirm to the GSA standards, because the contracting specialist who's going to review your proposal basically is going to say, does it match the needs? And you say, well, how do I know what the guidelines and the standards are? Well, you can actually find the GSA schedule solicitation on sam.gov, and all you have to do is enter that, or you can go to the GSA websites and you can find that document. The real issue here is getting these 34 items that are required in the proper format that GSA wants and in the proper situation, and providing it to on the e-offer portal. And then, okay, let's assume that you're on the schedule. How do I win work? Well, GSA maintains a what I call a secret file, and that's basically they every time they list RFPs and tasks on what's called eBuy. And so once you're on a schedule, you will have access to these opportunities on eBuy that you can choose to bid on. The reason I say it's secret is only schedule holders can get real access to that web portal. And these opportunities generally start at 25,000 and up. If you reflect back on that 50,000, all you have to do is win two of these opportunities to do that. They're all based on the large categories and the 130 special item numbers or sins. And all those are based on NAICS codes. So what you're looking for is, does my NAICS code match the sin that I want to go on? And have I been awarded that sin in my schedule? If that's the case, you can actually um, compete and submit a offer for any task that appears on the eBuy situation. And usually you can submit those proposals directly back through the eBuy portal, or if the agency who's listed it says, well, send it to me in an email, they'll let you know and they'll show that to you for that opportunity. So let's take a look at the marketplace. Well, right now, that marketplace exceeds 330 billion. And it's divided among the mass schedules and what are called GWACs. Interestingly enough, GSA has recently been tasked to take over a lot of the GWACs, and a GWAC is a government-wide acquisition contract. So the bottom line here is, if you were uh, fortunate enough to get onto a CIOSP contract, that's a GWAC, but that's going to be moving over to GSA to administer. So there's a whole I'll call it upheaval in the marketplace. A lot of the agencies who ran their own contracts, their own GWACs, are losing those opportunities, and their contracting folks are moving over to GSA. So there's again, it's a large opportunity, a large piece, and it's growing because of the consolidation at GSA. And the real issue is there's more opportunities. How the GSA will actually manage those agency GWACs is still up in the air. They're really trying to digest all that. But right now, the real issue is there are huge opportunities for small businesses to do this. And you don't have to be primate. If you can find someone who wants subcontractors, you can do that. But you have to find the task and do the outreach to those large primes if you're trying to do a subcontracting situation. And the mass schedule, the multiple award schedule, uh, really includes almost everything the GSA buys or the government buys. It doesn't, interestingly, include ammunition or weapons, but training, IT, travel, accounting, a whole host of other kinds of categories. And equally interesting, the federal government and the state and local governments could use the schedule, but only federal agencies can use a GWAC. So it's a distinction, and we'll take a look at the distinction between a GWAC and the GSA schedule in just a second. In fact, we're next. So the mass contract has an infinite amount of suppliers. Um, so they don't say, well, we're going to close this. It's always open. It's always available for a bid. There are no dollar limits, meaning that if an agency wants to put an opportunity out there for 10 years and wants that opportunity to be $10 million a year, they could do that. The schedule is based on 5-year increments and 4-year options. So what you have to do is you have to perform well over the 5 years. And if you've performed well and meet the GSA standards, you in fact will be given the opportunity to exercise an option for another 5 years. And so they do that on a every 4 years. So it's a good long opportunity for a contract. The GWAC is totally different. They only select a limited number of suppliers. So they want to be able to manage that. They want to limit that. So you can have lots of primes and you can have subs, but it's the prime who counts as the supplier. There are also defined deadlines when you have to submit a proposal. And if you miss that deadline, you're out of luck. Even if you miss it by one day or in many cases, 5 hours, you cannot get they will not accept your proposal. There's also a dollar limit associated with the spending. So a lot of GWACs are good for $500 million. When they reach that threshold, they will cut off the contract and then use that to basically control the spending. And then they may, in turn, say, we've reached the dollar limit. We're going to then cut off the taskings and get prepared to do another renewal of that GWAC. So every 5 years, they can put another contract in place. GWACs are harder to get. So the best thing that you can do if you're starting out in the government contracting is start with the uh, GSA schedule because it's easier to complete. And again, GWACs basically are 5-year contracts with 1-year options. So at each year, if you haven't met their particular standards for that contract, they have the ability to do an off ramp and the ability to do an on ramp. So they can take people and contracts and move them on and off the situation. The other interesting thing about a GWAC is, in fact, it can be used to fill out the labor categories on a mass schedule. So if you've gotten a 8A Stars 3 contract as an example, you can take the labor categories and rates and ask GSA to add those rates through a modification to your GSA schedule um, and basically expand it. I had a customer uh, that I worked with for several years who had probably 6 or 8 labor categories on their mass schedule. They were able to get a 8A star schedule, and we turned around and took their schedule from those um, limited number of labor categories to 135 labor categories on their mass schedule so they could compete along with a lot of the larger companies um, on the mass schedule because of moving labor categories from one contract and populating another with it. And that's, certainly things that can be done. It doesn't, you're not allowed to reverse it the other way. You can't go from a mass schedule to a GWAC, but you can go from a GWAC to a mass schedule. The other thing is the GWACs are, again, they're limited, and they're difficult to get, and sometimes they can be difficult to maintain. One other unique aspect of the GSA schedules is they're also bordered by size. So you can have a woman-owned small business, you can have an 8A small business, you can have a small business, you can have an other, and the other includes, by revenue standards, all medium-sized businesses and large businesses. But the categories that other businesses are eligible to compete on are also limited. So there's certain special item numbers that only small businesses can compete for. And, so it becomes important when you look at what sins you're looking for on the GWAC to basically say, okay, these are the ones that I can compete for, and maybe these are the special categories. One of those special categories is temporary staffing, and temporary staffing is restricted to small business entities. So if you want to get into offering temporary staff to the government, in fact, if you're a small business, you can do that on the GSA schedule, where that's not possible on a GWAC. So where do I find all the information? Well, there's a couple of places. Obviously, I've mentioned the sam.gov site, and so you can find the solicitation to that piece. You can also go to GSA buying and selling to the government, and that will list a whole lot of the documentation that you need. I will also tell you it's not going to complete listing, so be careful when you do that. You'll also see the GSA multiple award schedule roadmap, and that's where they put a lot of the templates out there, and the templates are required for you to use. So you just can't put together your own kind of situation. You have to use the GSA template. A good example of that is writing up your past performance. They're basically 7 questions that GSA wants you to answer, but they're not the same things that you would write up in a past performance citation. So the real issue is what you have in your past performance citation that you would submit to show your capabilities is not everything that GSA is looking for. So you have to know what they're looking for and answer those specific situations. For example, in a past performance situation, they want to know if you use subcontractors. And if you use subcontractors, how do you integrate those subcontractors into your quality standards? So you have to be familiar with what GSA is looking for so you can say, well, this is the situation that that's coming forth, and trying to get that situation in correctly. These are the various categories. These are the 12 categories. Information technology is the most widely used. Um, that has the IT professional services, it has the cloud services, it has the cybersecurity services all embedded in it. And again, this particular category has unique requirements. You have to have 2 contracts to support the labor categories so that you can make those things happen. Professional services are generally the accounting type of things, the consulting issues, the contract or program management pieces. I'd ask you to think about when you're looking at professional services to be careful because with the recent Dodge initiatives, GSA was told to pull back the consulting contracts. And so the companies that had long-standing um, consulting contracts with a SIN called 541611 suddenly found that the government canceled those contracts at the determination of the government. It wasn't necessarily fair, but that was one way that the government could reduce the amount of business and the amount of situations, in fact, that they were offering. And so they did that. And I've had companies lose 2 and 3 contracts that were in the second or third year of execution at the behest of the government, just saying, thank you very much. We no longer need those services. Facilities management is related to construction. It's related to the maintaining of grounds. For example, if someone might be have um, landscaping and gardening services and want to support the VA with doing that, well, that would be under the facilities management. But if you wanted to put up walls and reconfigure office space, that falls under facilities management as well. So it's a relatively broad category of opportunities to be able to go out there. Again, when you get into the facilities management and away from the IT, you have less of the competition in these areas. In fact, I just did a construction opportunity for a customer, and what I found is there were only 5 construction companies in the state of Virginia that actually had a facilities management contract and could do roofing and could do construction for agency requirements. Security and protection services. Well, if you think about who's providing guard services, who's providing security requirements, that's all under that security and protection services. So if you have a need to go to the Social Security Administration, the security out there is actually procured through this particular SIN. And so those services can be done at that time. Office management tends to be more of the I want to be able to provide you with hardware and software support services for office management. So this is the computer leasing or the selling of equipment to support a, a facility, an agency. Um, as the government moves into what's called CMMC, the office management and selling those computers and those equipment will be severely restricted because companies have to be CMC certified before they can do that. That's basically saying they've checked out from the procure the Dells of the world. They've checked out that piece of equipment and they're certifying that it's virus free and there are no backdoors on that piece of equipment. And so companies have to be CMMC level 1 certified and CMMC level 1A and 2 certified before they can sell uh, physical equipment. But again, the office management tends to be more product oriented. The next category is scientific management solutions. Well, this is the equipment that a lot of people use in the laboratories. So if you're looking at at a hospital. DoD might want to, Department of Defense might be wanting to sell, um, buy laboratory equipment for some of their hospitals. This is where they would buy that. And again, these are not usually the large uh, providers or builders of those equipment. The Fishers of the world and those types of companies don't have the contract, but in fact, small businesses who are distributors of that uh, do that. And this is again a product oriented situation. You won't see a lot of staff on scientific management solutions, but you will see a lot of equipment. The next category is human capital. Well, what's human capital? That's the staffing. That's the HR functions. That's the payroll functions. That's all of those things that go into supporting a agency's activities. A lot of agencies don't have those needs, but a lot of state and local governments have those needs. So this is where the state and local government could play. This is also where temporary staffing can comes into a situation. So we have someone at a agency or activity who needs to go on maternity leave. Well, they need to replace that individual for 6 months while that individual is on maternity leave. So they turn to human capital and they request that type of individual for their accounting department or for whatever needs might be to support that particular activity. The next category is the industrial products and services. These are all the cleaning products. These are all the mops and the brooms and the those sorts of things from that level. But it's also the heavy equipment, the forklifts, the um, the hand pallet trucks, all of those heavy sorts of things that are needed in warehousing types of situations, but also in janitorial situations. So if an agency has its own janitorial staff, they can buy products. Or if they have a company that provides janitorial services, but they don't want to buy the products from the janitorial services because they have a specific products that they want to use in their building, they can buy the products here. But they could also buy the janitorial services, but they can't buy it under the industrial products. They'd have to go to the facilities management piece to get those janitorial services. The reason I'm making that distinction is these categories are not always uh, clearly defined. They've been built up over time, and so as a consequence, certain segments of GSA have certain areas that they have negotiated for that opportunity. So before you go out and say, well, I want to do facilities management uh, or I want to sell industrial products under facilities management, no, you have to look and see on the each one of these categories so that you can make sure that you are providing the product or the services that you want to make happen for your customers on this schedule. Uh, the next one is a new organization, a new requirement. A lot of the smaller agencies don't do their own travel requirements. And so they have a need for hotel requirements or airline tickets or those sorts of things under travel. And so they turn to activities to contract for this. This is particularly true with FEMA when they have a natural disaster. They turn around and turn to various companies that can get them housing for the people, so they don't have to put up tents or bring in trailers. So this particular activity is becoming more and more utilized. And again, it's a whole new element. So if you're doing travel or housing types of requirements, this is where that comes in. Transportation and logistics services is pretty much just what it sounds. The one thing that is not included is long haul trucking. Long haul trucking is basically um, supported by the Defense Logistics Agency. So DLA handles all that long haul trucking, and they have a whole separate contract to manage that. But if you want to do FedEx and you wanted to get a FedEx contract, you could do that logistics service. Or if you wanted to have management of a warehouse or support the staffing of a warehouse, the transportation and logistics category is in fact where you would find the support that you need. The other two areas, the furniture and service, furniture and furnishings. Well, bottom line is organizations need rugs. Organizations need standardized furniture components, or they need they need to put up the partitions in new office spaces. All of this is handled there, and if you wanted to in turn sell uh, the basically to set up the partitions, this is where you would go. Um, Department of Defense has a whole warehouse of partitions where they turn to contractors and say, basically, I want you to set up a whole new office space with 12 cubicles in this space, and you can pick up the partitions and the parts and the desks that you need to do that from that warehouse. You don't have to buy it. So you have a situation where you can buy products, you have a situation where you can just support the movement and logistics of the products, or you have a situation where you can actually establish those products. The same thing is true of rekeying office spaces. Now you can actually, if they have locks on the doors, you can actually rekey those. So locksmiths would fall under the furniture and furnishing pieces. And then there's the miscellaneous. And the miscellaneous is basically a pretty short category, and it basically covers pretty much anything that's not covered or not specifically excluded in those things. And you say, well, what's excluded, Greg? Well, architecture and folks, when the GSA schedule was established, said, we don't want to be on the schedule. We don't want to have our support services on a schedule where we would have to basically provide pricing for our architectural requirements because we feel each product is unique and we need the flexibility to bid on that. So you won't find any architectural services on the GSA schedule because they were specifically excluded by congressional action as the architects basically lobbied Congress to be excluded when the GSA schedule was established. So you need to take a look and make sure that something that you want to do hasn't been excluded from one of these categories. And of course, I mentioned weapons and ammunition, that you won't find it under a GSA schedule, and you won't find it under the mass schedule. So these are things that you need to look at. And you say, well, where do I find all that? There's a spot called GSA eLibrary, and you can pull all of that information from the eLibrary, and you can find all the SINs, special item numbers that are associated with these situations, and you can make all that happen for you. Um, and find out what's there. But again, there are more than 130 different sins, but you have to make sure when you're putting together your proposal that your activities fall within the scope of that particular sin. Because if not, GSA will basically say, no, you can't do that, and you'll get a rejection notice, which means you just have to redo everything and resubmit it. So, basic requirements. Okay. You have to complete a SAM registration. Well, if you're wanting to do contracting with the government, you have to be registered in SAM. And what they're really trying to determine is what NAICS codes are you doing? So what areas of specialization? How big are you? Uh, who are your points of contact? And once you've registered in SAM, you'll be also given a unique identifying number or unique entity number identification. So what that entity number does is it basically says who you are as a company. You will need that UEI to support all of your activities. So every time you go to enter something into GSA, you in fact you have to enter it in through your UEI. So it becomes an important number. You'll also get a cage code, but that's a separate activity that IRS will award you once you're registered in SAM. So you get two unique activities by registering in SAM. Yes, you have to have the UEI. The cage code follows you wherever you go. Okay. We mentioned getting a copy of the solicitation, and you can get it through sam.gov or you can get it through GSA eLibrary, and you can also look up the specifics there. And you need to then determine what special identification number are you going to go through. And again, it's based on your NAICS code. So you could enter a NAICS code into eLibrary, and you could come up with the various sins that NAICS code supports. Then you can go to each sin, take a look at the scope, and find out where you can perform. But remember, you have to have past performance for each of these sins. So you have to have at least one contract that says, here's what I've done, and you have to be able to write up that past performance and come up with a statement of work. And we're going to go through all the various elements of that, and I'm just giving you the basics at this point in time. And again, make sure you look at the scope statement in eLibrary to make sure that you can perform under that particular SIN and supported with the NAICS code. By the way, let's say you have um, performance and it was under a NAICS code that you don't have in your SAM registration. Well, guess what? You have to update your SAM registration with that NAICS code before you can be awarded a contract. By the way, the government basically pays you by, in fact, a credit card. So you have to be able to accept a credit card. So if your SAM registration says you don't accept a credit card, you'll be rejected. So you have to pay attention to all the details, not only in the SAM, but you have to pay attention to the details of how you do business and what you want to see happen with, in fact, your schedule and what GSA wants to see happen. Because if you don't accept a credit card, they're going to reject you, and it's basically it's just checking a checkbox in your SAM registration, but you have to do that. And they go through the contract specialists, go through your SAM document to make sure that you meet these kinds of requirements, and that you have the NAICS codes associated with the activities that you want to do. So the SAM gives you the NAICS code verification, the UEI, the CAGE code, and in fact, it determines who you are for government contracting. So, how do you get a schedule? Well, these are the basic bottom lines, and so I'm going to go through these a little bit more completely. Uh, so don't get too concerned about these issues, but you have to have completed two training requirements to get a schedule. That's the readiness assessment and the pathway to success. And you can find both of those items on the um, the GSA website. And if you go to the GSA Mass Roadmap, that will take you to that particular website, and you'll see those training items. These items have to be taken and completed behind the GSA website. So you're putting it on there so they know that you have taken the training. The training for the readiness assessment is in fact putting down your NAICS codes, saying if you're registered in SAM, and answering a series of questions. It also gives you the opportunity to say, do you want that readiness assessment to be evaluated by GSA? Well, you can have that readiness assessment evaluated by GSA, but if you do, they say, you need to correct these things. This isn't for GSA. This is for you. So I will always recommend that you say, no, I don't really need GSA to evaluate my readiness assessment. The other training is called the Pathway to Success. And that's a series of 95 slides that you just have to go through. And it deals with the FAR and the DFAR. And so know that the FAR and DFAR are the controlling documents for GSA. And those documents, um, excuse me, when you do your SAM registration, you're also completing the FAR and DFAR. So when you do these things, you are going to be submitting copies of your SAM registration and your DFAR reporting, and that the training requirement supports your information, in fact, on how you do business and if you're following the regulations associated with it. Um, and so issues like, do you buy products from Bangladesh or any China that encourages child labor? So you have to be particularly susceptible to that type of situation. The next question is you have to do, have to write up your past performances. I've already said to you, you have to, for IT, you have to write up two past performances for that. Again, that's based on two different contracts, hopefully, that have similar labor categories associated with it. For all the other 12 categories, you only have to have one past performance. So you only have to have one type of situation. You also have to do past performance references. Well, this is basically a situation where they say, do you have any CPARs or evaluations from federal agencies? And if you do, you have to have three CPARs to qualify. If you don't, you have to provide past performance references. And these references are basically saying, who are you getting a reference from? What's the company? Um, what's the telephone number, email, and fax if they have one for that company? And how much did they spend with you on an annual basis or even on a total accumulation? They usually want to see that for the past 3 years. But you have to have these past performance references, because you're going to send past performance questionnaires to all of these three people so that you can say to GSA, yes, this is the work and this is the quality of work that in fact I've been able to accomplish. You have to develop your labor category descriptions. And the labor category descriptions are basically saying, what did you sell? So you have generally an invoice for that. And if the invoice basically says, okay, here's the labor category that I sold for that. So if it's a program manager, you have that. But you have to say, what's the qualifications of those program managers? GSA wants to know, very straightforward, how many years of experience does that program manager have? They next want to know, what does that program manager do? They manage contracts, schedules, resources, etc. And you have to put that together in a narrative format. You also have to say, what's the education level? Does that individual have a baccalaureate degree, or does that individual have a master's degree? And oh, by the way, does that individual have any special certifications like a PMP or an ITIL certification? And if that, you put that in the labor category description. So again, you start this with the experience, the functional description, and the education and certifications. Now you say, you want me to create that from whole cloth? No, not necessarily. If you want to say, I want to go and see what maybe my competitor is using for labor category descriptions, you can go to eLibrary, put in that competitor's name, the XYZ company, and if they have a schedule, their schedule will come up and you can look at the labor categories that that competitor is using. If you have similar labor categories, you can say, well, I'm going to take that, I'm going to block that, I'm going to do that. In this case, plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery. I say that with tongue in cheek. But at the same time, if you don't want to create it from whole cloth, that's one way of starting it. Or another way of starting that is to basically say, what was the description in the statement of work that the company gave me to do this? What did they want me to do? And so you have that document that you can go to as well. But again, you have to describe all the labor categories that, in fact, you're trying to put together a description on. You also have to develop pricing items. There's several pricing items, and I'll go over those a little bit later. The things that you have to do are basically put together a spreadsheet that basically says, here's the sin that I'm going for, here's the labor category description, here's the title, here's what my invoice rate is, and put that together in a large spreadsheet. You also have to have a market rate, and your market rate or your commercial rate basically comes from the folks that you have invoiced. Or you can take another tack and say, here's what I'd like to have. Here's the highest rate that I'd like to have, but then I'm going to discount it when I get to the invoice rate. And there's various ways to play that particular game. But the issue is, whatever you get in terms of pricing to GSA, the government always gets the best price. So at the minimum on your pricing documents, you have to give a 1% discount. And we'll talk about why the 1% discount. But the real issue is, you have to basically say, whatever I've offered to commercial contracts If it's $100, I'm going to give my potential government contract $99 uh, in terms of the price. That's the price that you get, and then there's the price that GSA gets, and we'll talk about that price and how that works out in a little bit later. And you have to evaluate your company, and that evaluation is done through those past performance questionnaires that you send out to your references. And so those are things that have to be done. And of course, if you have CPARs, then in fact you can submit those as alternatives. You also have to prepare administrative documents, and those are, you know, basically who you are and how you do work and how you do functions. And you have to prepare financial documents, and those are the profit and loss statements. Those are the balance sheets statements that you have to be able to submit. And GSA goes through those profit and loss and balance sheet statements. So a lot of people think, well, I can just create that and make that happen. No, you can't just create it. You have to do a stylized format. And again, that's in accrual format. So it has to be done consistently with the standards the GSA is looking for. Okay. One of these are basically a checklist, and these checklists are what I put together. And bottom line of that is this is items that you're going to have to do and perform. So you have to obtain a federal supply schedule logon. And if you go to the GSA.gov and you or the Mass Roadmap or the Vendor Support Center, you can get a logon, and you have to have that logon because that allows you to get into the e-offer uh, portal and submit your proposal. Obviously, without that, you can't go anywhere. We talked about the readiness assessment, and basically it's saying what sins are you going to use, how are you going to do that, and you can that's again on the eLibrary webpage, or it's also you can pull that off of the uh, GSA Mass Roadmap. But those are training requirements that you have to do. That little A over there is whether this is a administrative requirement or whether this is a technical requirement. And so this tells you that those four things are in fact administrative requirements. And we've talked a lot about SAM and the reps inserts, and so you have to have that entity and the uh, FAR and DFAR reports, and normally called reps inserts. Um, we're getting close to about the time that we want to take a break. And so I will complete this page, and then we'll take a break after this is done. We talked about the past performance evaluation, 3 companies, the points of contact, plus the past performance piece, and you have to have 3 references. And these references basically are, if you've done web development for a local company, you can use that, but you have to make sure that it falls into that revenue requirement. Corporate experience. A lot of people think, well, I have corporate experience. I put together statements that I put together in my proposals. That corporate experience, while it's nice, is not what GSA is looking for. They have 7 specific questions that they want you to answer about how your company does work. And you have to answer those specific questions and go from that statement. Um, for example, they want to know when the company was established. Well, why was that? Why do they want to know that? Because that gets into the 2-year requirement that you have to be in business for. They also want to know how you work with subcontractors, if you work with subcontractors. They also want to know how you get knowledge and how you work with federal agencies to do that. So, do you go to industry days? Do you do outreach to program managers? And all of those kinds of questions they ask you in your corporate experience document. And then we talked about a commercial price list or market price list. Commercial price list is something that you advertise on your website, and you have that on your website, so it lists all the labor categories that you use and what prices you do. Um, Not a lot of small businesses have that. Market price list is something that you generate, and you generate that from your invoices, and you basically say, this is where I started. This is the date. This is the currency of this document, and that becomes a document that you to support. And then the final documents in this particular portion, the first 8 documents, are the 2 years of balance sheets and profit and loss in accrual, and they have to be done. And so that's why I recommend that you have, something like Quicken or QuickBooks, that you can basically put all that information and all your accumulation and accrual and revenue and expenses in, because that's the type of things that are in the profit and loss and the balance sheets. Of course, the balance sheets basically says this is the revenue I generated, and this is what my expenditures, and hopefully your revenue that you generated is greater than your expenditures, and of course that will be reflected in your profit and loss. So at this time, I think Yasmin is going to basically tell me, oh, we need to take at least a 5 minute break. And
Yeah.
so,
Yes, that's right. Great. We should take a 5 minute break. Give everybody a little break, and we will see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
and that's going to be at 11:07. So we'll see you back at
Excellent.
11:07.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. So we'll get going on the next level. So we'll go to the checklist part 2. Okay. To support your project summaries, you need to have a statement of work. Now, not all small businesses, or not all businesses, commercial businesses, give you a statement of work. And what I would tell you is, if you don't have a statement of work, is create one. Create that statement of work, because you have to say to GSA, this is what they wanted me to do, and this is what I did. And so that statement of work basically is a validation of your sin. It's a validation of the NAICS codes, and it's a validation of how you of your project summaries. So if you're looking at having a cloud work, and you say, okay, I did cloud work, but I did IT professional services, and I did uh, basically cybersecurity, that statement of work basically has to say, this is what I did. And so a lot of times the statement of work says, okay, this is what we want from you. These are the rates we're going to pay. You don't need to go through that level of detail, but you need to clearly articulate to GSA what is it that the contract required you to do, and then in your project summaries what you did. You also need to basically say you're you're taking any exceptions to the reps inserts. Well, the reps inserts are where? That's in the solicitation. So there are things associated with the solicitation that you have to agree to do. For example, you have to agree to submit things in if they require it on paper or submit things digitally. So you have to take a look at those exceptions and reps inserts, knowing what you are dealing with. And all of those reps inserts are contained in the FAR and DFAR. So if you go through all those things, you could spend days, literally days, reading all those and not trying to understand them. And I would suggest that it doesn't really matter because you're going to have to conform to those reps inserts anyhow, and it's mandatory. So if you don't conform, or at least you take an exception, you better have a good reason why you're taking an exception to those particular activities. We've talked a lot about labor category descriptions or services. We haven't talked a lot about services. You can offer services and not do labor categories if you want to. And the reason you may want to is because that's how you provide support. For example, you could say, I want to provide accounting services using these standard accounting practices. And you could put that in there and you could come up with a price that you might have from your invoices to support that. Would GSA accept that? Yes, they would under that particular sin associated with it. So you could do that. And the other issue that is not listed there is, how about products? You have to be able to describe those products that you're offering as well. So this is a list of the labor categories, or this is, and with descriptions, and we talked about what's in a labor category description. The same thing is basically true for services. It basically has to describe what you're providing and how you're providing it. And then if you deal with products, you basically have to turn around and say, here's what the product is, here's who's the manufacturer, here's what it does, and it's 120 volts of situations, and that's or it's 240, and so that the organization knows exactly what it is that you're providing. On a subcontracting plan, if you're a small business, you don't need it. If you're a big business, you have to have it. And if you're a big business, it basically requires that you're giving away 30% of your contract value to small businesses. And if you're a big business, you have to identify what type of small business. Like if you're a veteran-owned small business, or a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, or an 8A, or a woman-owned, or whatever that small business category is, you have to be able to identify that, and that's why you basically subcontract to large businesses, because they need your support. They have, if they're a large business trying to go after a GSA contract, they've got to give away 30% of it. And so it's an opportunity for you to, in fact, get on the contract and get experience on the contract if you haven't already. You also have to build a compensation plan for your professional employees. Well, that basically says, okay, how do people generate leave? How do people what benefits do I provide? Vision and dental and 401ks, and you provide all that. This can be taken out of your employee handbook if you have such a document, but they only want to see 4 pages of this. They don't want to see the entire handbook, so you have to translate that in. They also would like to see an org chart of your organization, and that goes into the compensation plan. The project experience, again, that's a template, and that basically says, here's how you do work. And so, again, if it's project experience. It's 1 for all the rest of the categories. It's 2 for IT. And again, this is a training situation. If you have people who are working under the Service Contract Act, you have to identify those people, and you have to take and identify the wage grade situation that's available for that particular person. I was just doing one last night, and the bottom line, it was for an administrative assistant. And the administrative assistant's wage grade for Northern Virginia is 2015 4281. And that basically says this is what the minimum that I have to pay that particular person under the Service Contract Act. And so you have to do that piece as well. Next, you have to have a quality control plan. And again, it's limited to 4 pages, but you're answering specific questions. One of the questions is, in your organization, in your company, who is responsible for quality? Who makes sure that the deliverables that you're providing to the agency meet all the requirements and is presented in such a manner that, in fact, it's understandable by that agency in terms of what you're providing. So it doesn't matter if it's a spreadsheet or a product or whatever, someone has to do it. And for example, if you're selling products, that quality control person probably is also responsible for the delivery dates to make sure the delivery date is negotiated and that the delivery date is maintained and it is basically dropped off on the warehouse or the loading dock steps for that particular organization. So quality can really, spans a whole lot of activities and functionality for, in fact, organizations. And then we get into the offered pricing. Again, the pricing template basically says you got to have at least a 1% discount off of your invoices. And you have to make a determination if it's on the customer site or if it's on a site that is the contractor site. Well, why? If it's on a customer site, your costs are obviously going to be lower. If it's on your site, contractor site, you are providing the heat, the water, the coffee, the computers, and so in fact it could be higher. But you have to make a distinction if in fact you have that. So you would have to have an invoice that shows contractor site, customer site differentials. So it's something that you have to prove, and you have to prove that with an invoice that says, here's what we have done, and this is how we do business, and this is how we do pricing. Again, that pricing contains a lot of information. That template is now, it's basically called the FCP, or the Federal Supply Schedule Catalog Program Template, and you have to have that template completed and the pricing and the discounts already established for that. And that's something that, in fact, GSA pays a lot of attention to. One of the questions you get asked is, where will you do business? Will you do it domestically only, or will you do it worldwide? Well, worldwide could include State Department and Department of Defense. Those are primarily the agencies that have activities worldwide, at least on a large scale. But if you're trying to do that level of support, you have to identify that, because your rates for worldwide are going to be different. As an example, if you're trying to do work in some Middle East, you have to say, okay, I have insurance requirements, I have evacuation requirements, I have housing, I have food, I have all of those requirements and maybe even security, which are going to increase your price. But you might say, well, okay, I'm just going to say it's worldwide and I'm going to keep my price the same for that labor category. Well, then you're going to have to negotiate all the rest of those items when, in fact, that comes to pricing. And GSA will just say, hey, this is your pricing, but you can include some of those other items in what's called the OPM levels, and you can say these are order level material requirements that were not specified in the task. So there's ways to get around that, but you have to know what those are. You also have to have an economic proposal adjustment, EPA, not the Environmental Protection Agency, but this is basically how are you going to increase prices year over year? The standard template price is 2.5%. You can go higher, you can go lower. You can go higher, but you have to justify it. And you can go back to the Department of Labor and you can see what the current rates are. For example, if you're doing IT, the current labor rate adjustment, EPA adjustment, is in fact 4.3%. So you could go 4.3% in your proposal, but you have to then say, this is why. And you have to provide documentation from that. So you'd have to provide the DOL Table 5 that supports those particular labor categories and that increase. But this EPA follows your contract for, in fact, the 20 years of the contract. So each year you're getting a 2.5% bump up. Some companies say, nah, I don't need an adjustment. Well, okay, then they're missing out on that increase because GSA and the government assumes that there's going to at least be salary increases and cost increases across the board. And this is where you get to put this into your labor categories in support of those labor categories. You also have to provide a form that's called the commercial sales practices. And this comes, a lot of the data comes from your profit and loss. It says, what was your revenue for this particular year? What's your discount rates? What are your most favorite customers? And this is filled out with inside the e-offer portal. You also have to do pricing support. And we talked about invoices. Well, a lot of small businesses say invoices, I just provide my firm fixed price rate. So if it's, I bid that and they accepted my rate for $20,000 a year, then in fact, okay, that's available. But how are you going to break that down? Well, the errata sheet is a methodology that you use to break down that pricing. You can basically say, for that bid, I had these kinds of labor categories. These are the rates for those labor categories. And therefore, this errata sheet, which is a matrix, basically says, okay, here's the rates that on this FFP that I would have charged if I'd have charged it by individual labor categories. And so that's a way to get around that. And the same thing can be used if you're selling products and you bundled the product into a firm fixed piece. Therefore, the errata sheet is used to unbundle those firm fixed price rates. You also have to have a statement for uncompensated overtime. Well, what's uncompensated overtime? I'm not going to pay you for your overtime. Well, what category of employee does that apply to? If you say, I have these labor categories and these people are paid on an hourly basis, they in fact are considered exempt employees from the FAR statement. If you have professional employees that are paid on a salary, they are not in they are not exempt from the uncompensated overtime. Therefore, you have to have a statement that covers those non-exempt employees. And then you have to have a labor category matrix for IT specifically. So I've covered a lot of the checklist. It's not all. Obviously, I said there were 34 items, but it includes the majority of those pieces. So, what happens after your proposal is submitted? Well, your proposal is submitted through eOffer. And obviously, to do that, you have to have that FSS logon. You have to have a UEI. And basically, when you submit that, then in fact, they will give you a, um, a verification, and then for you can, submit that contract. But in order to do that, you have to have those three elements. And you basically are going to copy and paste um, this into the GSA server. A lot of those documents, can go in holistically. Some of them can't. Some of them have to be, you know, parsed out in pieces. And normally the contract specialist can take 30 to 90 days, uh, depending on the schedule and the GSA workload. I say depending on the GSA workload because, as you all probably know, GSA has had some, like a lot of agencies, has had some tremendous reductions in staffing. And so many of those people are providing support, but in fact, they're providing support um, for multiple opportunities. So I've had proposals waiting for the contract specialist to review them for as long as 9 months now. It does take some time depending on that. Normal process 30 to 90 days, but we're not in a normal period of time. The contract specialist will basically let you know that you have any deficiencies and give you the opportunity to correct them. Um, there are two types of corrections. One is called a rejection letter. A rejection letter says, nope, this is so messed up, and these are all the things that need to be fixed, and we're not going to do anything else with this. Or they'll send you an email and they say, I need you to submit this document, or I need you to make some corrections in that document. And most specialists will allow you to do the corrections because they don't want to see your proposal come back to them again and they have to totally review it. And the contract specialist will send also your financial documents to a different office. They're usually sent to the office in Chicago, and they review your financial documents. If they think that you're not a financially or you're on the bubble of a financially stable company, what they'll ask you to do is they'll ask you to have your bank send them a uh, notice on your banking statements and your et cetera. And so these are things that, again, you want to be able to make sure that your financials are as solid as possible before you send them in. If you're doing the cybersecurity, you have to do orals, and the orals are based on you submitting 5 people and the names, and they will schedule the orals. If you have cybersecurity in your proposal, they will not approve the schedule for award until the orals are completed. And if the orals are, if you're not successful in the orals, they may award everything else, but the HACSIN will not be awarded. Once that process is done, the contract specialist will schedule negotiations. And they usually do this by a Teams meeting But they also another recent innovation is they come out with what are called negotiation objectives, and they say this is what I want your pricing to be, or you have to accept the OLM, or you have to accept the refresh 29 before we go forward. And once all those are done, those negotiation objectives, you send that back, and the contract specialist will then submit the final proposal review. And that basically says, here's everything that you've agreed to. Here's, this is, you're conforming to what they want, and you're agreeing to the rates and all the processes. And once that's done, it's sent back to the contract specialist, and they will recommend award. And once that goes up to the contracting office, at that point, you must then create once it's approved for award, you're going to have to create a multiple award schedule price list, and you're going to have to create the FCP document so that you can put that in the new GSA portal. They created this system with Refresh 28, and you have to do some extra steps to get your price list onto the GSA Advantage and ultimately give you access to eBuy. So this is the next piece. You have to do a seller's profile, basically saying who you are, where you're located, etc. And that's pretty easy. It's done pretty quickly because the contract specialist has worked with you. They usually update that seller's profile pretty quickly. Then you must open an eMod. And this eMod is basically so you can submit the FCP. And you have to submit the FCP, and it has to be validated along with a terms and conditions letter. And all that has to be approved by the contract specialist. Finally, you load your price list or your also called by GSA your terms and conditions, which is your GSA schedule price list, to the FCP price list, and that will then be uploaded to GSA Advantage, and that will be also grant you access to eBuy using that FSS logon. So getting the logon, you get to see the SINs, you see the company selects opportunities. You don't have to propose on everything. You can decide which ones you can win work on. And hopefully the company wins an opportunity and then, is scheduled to start work. Now, having said refresh 28 and 29, at the beginning of January, GSA was on refresh 24. Through obviously November, they've gone to refresh 29. They're now going to come out on 1 December with refresh 30. So they've done 6 refreshes. Typically in the past, GSA would do a refresh once a year. But because of all the changes in the systems, they're rolling out refreshes much more rapidly. As a contractor, these refreshes are mandatory, and so you have to accept all the refreshes and take a look at that, and you have to do that to continue the process. Also, you have to report your sales, and we can talk about that in a separate type situation. And I say that because I want to get to the sample documents so that you have a chance to look at that and deal with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape from this presentation, and I'm going to basically go to out of PowerPoint and go to some other documents. So bear with me for a second. I talked to you about the CSP, and this is a sample of the CSP. And you can, this is basically, who you sell it to, how you sell it, what your discounts are. And so these are things that you would fill out in terms of, dealing with GSA. Here's a copy of a compensation plan. And you can see all the things that go into a compensation plan. And, how you deal with insurance and other benefits. This one, they were able to do it in a couple of pages, but this, is out there and available. I'm going to do reps and certs. Basically, it's just a statement that says, okay, you don't take any exceptions to the reps and certs. Talked about uncompensated overtime. Here's the policy. Boom. And it's just that. This is a sample of the past performance questionnaire. And again, it goes to the person who is on the reference, put all the information associated with it, and your performance. And that's, as simple as that. Oop, let's see. Didn't want to do that. Corporate experience document. Those are the questions that are asked. Number of employees, expertise, organization and accounting controls. QuickBooks obviously is there. Resources, how you market, and intended use of subcontractors. And again, these are things that are not negotiable. They have to be answered. This is a market price list. And this is based on services. This company provided video services, so they could provide those levels of rates, but they spelled it out. They didn't do any individual labor categories, but they did do it, and you see that it has a date associated with it. And this is a price proposal template. And let's go back to this way. And you see the vendor, the SIN, the service, description, keywords, price, discounts to the commercial, discounts to GSA. All of these things are done and incorporated. And as you can see, that's just the first line, and there are multiple lines associated with it. So at this point, we're about 3/4 of the way through of our timeline. And I do want to give an opportunity to ask any of those questions. So I'm going to click off this and click back to this and go to there. And basically what I'm, well, I'm going to change that one up because that's when I was a PTAP counselor. again, what I'm going to offer you is, in fact, an opportunity for you to sit down with me and go through who you are, what you are, and if you're going to be eligible for a GSA schedule. To do that, I'm going to need an email from you. That's my email. And you can send an email that says, hey, Greg, I want to talk to you about a GSA schedule. And if you do that, I'll set up a time when we can talk and we can talk about who you are, what you have, and if you're going to be eligible for a GSA schedule. And we can go from there. A lot of people say, well, Greg, do you put together GSA schedules? And the answer is, of course I do. I put together over 450 GSA schedules and modifications. So then the people ask, well, what's the price? Well, I don't discuss price with anybody. I discuss price with individual companies. So if you're interested in knowing what would be the price for me to work with you to get a GSA schedule and are you eligible, that's the way to get a hold of me and we can set up a meeting to discuss that. And with that, I'm going to be silent and turn it over to Yasmin to maybe address some of those questions that you've diligently put into the chat box.
I- Thanks so much, Greg. That was an excellent presentation as always. So yes, now is your opportunity to ask Greg your questions, and you can do that by typing in the chat box, or if you'd like him to go over anything that he mentioned earlier. So we have had people post questions over the past hour and a half. So I'll just go, to the beginning. So forgive us if some of these have already been answered in the presentation, but people join the webinar at different times and miss out on information. So here we go. First question is e-buy the same as e-offer?
No.
Okay.
I'll expand on that. E-offer is where you put in your proposal. So from the GSA perspectives, those 34 items that you have to create is put together in is put and loaded into e-offer. Then there's another web portal called eMod when you want to change your proposal. There's another web portal that's basically a sales portal where you report what you've sold. And then there is, in fact, the eBuy portal. And the eBuy portal is where that secret area is that they put all those tasks. And GSA lists all those tasks for every sin, but you only get to look at the sins that you have been awarded. So it's a restricted portal, but you get to see everything that's available and it changes daily. And they usually add 10 to 15 new opportunities daily.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You had mentioned selling for 2 years. I heard it has to be two different contracts for the same labor category, but I missed what was said. If selling products, does it have to be 2 years of the same product or two different contracts?
Okay. Products are, exclusionary from that standpoint. Products, all you have to do is provide one contract and provide basically one price associated with that. So again, products are slightly different than selling labor categories, and the two contracts apply to IT only. Everything else of those other 12 categories are in fact, the other 11 categories, I should say, are in fact only require one sale.
Okay. Next question is, what are the guidelines to build labor category and rate, and what is the best way to do that?
Okay, we covered the labor categories, but I'll go over it again. You have to have a line that says experience, a line that says functional description, and a line that says basically education and certifications. So those are the things that you have to have uh, to build them. You can certainly go through the process of going to GSA e-library, pulling up competitors' descriptions, if you will, but you also can, you know, take a look at other things out there. Yeah, if you want to go through, descriptions in Indeed or some of those other things that are out there, you can do that. But you have to categorize those three quantities. And I think the other question was building rates. Was that correct, Yasmin?
Yes.
Rates are built based on invoices. Rates are built on what you have done. The mass schedule is a have done issue. It's not I want to, it's has done. The GWAC is I want to. So you don't have to provide in a GWAC those situations of I've done that, but you have to provide that in the mass schedule. It's what it's based all on past performance.
Okay. Regarding past performance, can a subcontractor use their work as past performance
A-
for
a-
GSA?
Absolutely. No question about that. And it's done all the time, every day.
Okay, thanks. Can you clarify where janitorial services fall? Is it under facilities management or industrial services?
It's under facilities management.
Okay.
However, if you want to provide um, janitorial supplies to the government, and you can, assume get them at a wholesale rate that you can sell at a retail rate, that those supplies are under the industrial products.
Okay, next question is, does the GSA schedule have a template for required items?
No, it doesn't. Um, that's why I provide this as a service because the GSA schedule is very sparse in terms of templates. They provide some templates in terms of pricing. They don't provide a lot of templates in terms of past performance. They basically say, here's the solicitation, 185 pages. You read it and understand it, and when you do, then you can submit your proposal. I just synthesize that for you.
Thank you. Okay, is Seaport NXG similar to the GSA schedule, but for the Navy?
No, Seaport E is basically a GWAC, and it is a Navy GWAC, but it also is used by the Marine Corps. But it is not similar. It is what you it's a it's a standard that the Department of the Navy has, and they have their own standards for getting on the Seaport E.
Okay. Does the past performance have to be with the federal government?
No. I addressed that. It can be with state, can be local, can be with the business down the street that you're supporting with doing their website. Doesn't have to
Okay.
be.
And what if I don't have successive years of financial documents?
You're not going to be eligible. You have to have success for years, or you have to go back and create them.
Okay. Can I build labor categories from past jobs, not necessarily using my company name?
I'm trying to make sure I understand that one. You can use labor categories from past jobs, but the labor categories have to be um, something that the company has performed. So you can use them, but if your current company isn't performing that labor category, you're not going to be awarded it. So it that's basically a chicken and egg kind of question.
Okay. Can I update my price list? And if so, how often?
You can't update your price list. The only way you can update your price list and you're going to be updating um, what GSA is called terms and conditions now, and you're going to be updating that with escalation. So the escalation is the way to get increases in prices, but you must submit that escalation when you submit your proposal. So you can't, you can, there is a mechanism to increase your escalation, but you have to go through the GSA modification process to do that. And you can only usually do that once every 6 months.
Okay, and the final question, it looks like, is are we able to use another company's multiple award schedule as a sub-teaming relationship?
Okay. So I'm gonna use a little bit of a background here to say, okay, your um, sub teaming relationship. So you're assuming that the other company is going to go out and make a proposal using their GSA schedule. Okay. Yes. And you could be a subcontractor on that. Yes. But you'd have to work at whatever discount rates that they are directing. There is another way of doing that, and it's called a contract teaming agreement or CTA. And it basically says, I have a GSA schedule, they have a GSA schedule. We're going to join together forces to submit a proposal as a team using the rates from our schedules to and our labor categories to support that work.
Okay. All right, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, one more. Should we wait after December 1 to submit?
No, because you're going to be required to uh, accept the mandate of the December 1 proposal anyhow. All they're going to do is to say before award, you must accept mass mod 30. So no, it's not going to make any difference. And in fact, I'm working with a company right now that basically said GSA you have to accept refresh 29 before we'll award. So no, uh, waiting is not necessarily going to do you any big advantage, but you might want to go to GSA Interact, and that's a website, and they will describe for you what the proposed Mass Mod 30 is going to look like. And you can take a look at it and see if it's even going to impact on you. Now, Yasmin, I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing 45. Do we have additional questions there? Or am I just imagining?
No, I've pretty much gone through all of them. I'm looking through now. They're saying thank you. This is being very beneficial, and they'll be reaching out to speak to you. Thanks so much. Super helpful. I've put the link for the GSA Interact. One more question. What should be the minimum order limit on e-offer?
There really isn't any, you know, um, because that's established by the agency. So if you say, um, gee, I want to submit a bid for, let's say, $10,000, that's certainly on you. You can do that. Not a problem. But again, you have to recognize that, after the 5 years of the contract, they're going to want you to have $125,000 worth of work. And so they're looking for you to earn work every year, but they're not going to penalize you if you don't earn work in the first year or even the second year, because they say you have to be noticed by the federal agencies and you so from that standpoint they will give you a pass till the third year, but totally they want you to in the first 5 years earn 125,000, and for the next 5 years it goes up to 150.
Okay. All right, thanks. That seems to be all the questions. So I'd like to thank Greg for a fantastic presentation and for all of you for staying with us for the past 2 hours. Hope you found it useful. I'm going to be sending a copy of the slides and all those handouts that Greg had showed earlier on to you shortly, and the recording will be available maybe within about an hour or so. So you can review it again or share with your colleagues. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Greg. We hope to bring you back again next year. Stay safe, everybody. Enjoy holidays coming up. If you don't celebrate, just chill. Take care, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yashmin. Bye now.